December 1993. The era of Pablo Escobar is nearing its end. Over several years of constant drug wars, tens of thousands of Colombians have been killed. For the past few years, the entire country has lived in fear. Pablo is fighting a war on three fronts simultaneously, against the authorities, U.S. Special Services, and the extremist group Los Peeps, whose name literally means people persecuted by Pablo Escobar. This group is financed by the Cali cartel, the main enemy of the Medellin cartel, which Pablo leads. On the morning of December 2nd, a Los Peeps operative accidentally spots Pablo in the slums of Medellin. The drug lord is talking to his son on the phone. U.S. Special Services immediately intercept Escobar's phone call and dispatch a capture team. A few minutes later, the bloodiest narco-terrorist in human history is killed by an American bullet. At the end of '93, the Medellin cartel was decapitated. The number of murders in Colombia drops by 80% in just a couple of months. The huge organization falls apart. But there's a catch: drug trafficking not only doesn't decrease, but it actually grows. And not just in the USA, but in Central America, Europe, Russia, Japan, and even Australia. It seems like a contradiction, but the reality is different. After Escobar's killing, there was no power vacuum in the Colombian world. The main opponent of the Medellin group, the Cali cartel, began to take center stage. Everyone has heard of Escobar. He was not only the bloodiest but also the most famous narco-baron in history. But few know about the Cali cartel. Meanwhile, in their best years, they controlled 80% of the world's cocaine market, earning more than Pepsi and Boeing combined. Criminal experts agree that it was the most sophisticated criminal organization in world history. This is the story of Escobar's heirs, how the Cali cartel managed to defeat El Patron, how a love story led to a war between criminal clans, how the most effective drug empire was structured, one that Gustave Fring would envy, the involvement of the international Yakuza, and what the Colombian drug trade looks like today. Before talking about Pablo's business heirs, let's touch upon his relatives, the heirs by blood. It is necessary to relate what happened to the secondary characters of the series after the dramatic finale of the last season. As we know, Escobar valued loyalty above all, which is why his relatives held almost all the key posts in the cartel. Many observers and competitors feared that the surviving Medellin members would build a new empire on the ruins of the cartel. But in this case, it turned out that the apple fell far from the tree. His widow, Maria Victoria Henao, even during Escobar's life, did not particularly participate in her husband's criminal affairs. She also chose not to divide the inheritance after her husband's untimely death. However, she hastily renounced his surname, otherwise, she would have been barred from leaving the country. Germany, Brazil, and even the African nation of Mozambique refused her entry. Eventually, she took refuge in Argentina, a country long famous for its neutral attitude towards migrants with skeletons in their closets. 6 years later, the Colombian authorities still found Maria under a new name in Argentina. She was arrested on suspicion of money laundering for drug cartels. She had to spend several months in prison. In the end, the cops couldn't dig up anything on her, and Maria was released. Juan Pablo Escobar, Pablo Sr.'s son, actively squandered the blood money during his father's lifetime. Here is an archival family video where 10-year-old Pablo wanders through a Las Vegas casino and watches a Mike Tyson fight. Here are his childhood photos in front of luxury cars and private jets. And, of course, the legendary photo with his father in front of the White House. The drug lord was killed when the boy was only 16. He migrated to Argentina with his mother and also changed his name. He was now called Sebastián Marroquín. At first, it seemed that Sebastián should have followed the path of Michael Corleone and started rebuilding his father's criminal empire. But if you watch any interview with Sebastián, you will understand that he is a gentle soul. His main job is an architect, and on the side, he deals with the cultural heritage of his father, giving lectures, appearing on talk shows, and talking about how kind and attentive Pablo was. However, one cannot say that he is trying to whitewash the drug lord's name. It's a bit more complicated. Some have criticized the series Narcos, claiming it is historically accurate. The words of Escobar's son contradict this. He was one of the loudest critics of the series and directly stated that the image of his father and his ostentatious charity were overly romanticized. Sebastián does not deny that Pablo treated his entourage well, like any other person, but thousands of innocent people died at his hands, and millions became addicted to cocaine. His daughter, Manuela, as a result of a terrorist attack in the late 80s, was left permanently deaf in one ear. At some point, she tried to commit suicide due to paranoid thoughts, but now everything seems to have settled down. The drug lord's mother outlived her son by 13 years. Unlike her grandson, she still believes that her son was the best thing that could have happened to Colombia. The drug lord's father, Abel, was always ashamed of his son. He didn't even come to Pablo's funeral. He himself died of a lung disease in the early 2000s. There was also some dirty business. Some crooks are still trying to cash in on Escobar's image almost 30 years after his death. For example, in 2020, an illegitimate son of Pablo appeared out of nowhere, who was allegedly kidnapped by British intelligence, MI6. All the details of this incredible story can be found in his book for $20, which has a very poor rating. Another strange character also called himself Pablo's illegitimate son, but Escobar's relatives immediately debunked all these rumors. With the blood relatives sorted out, they decided not to continue the business and switch to a quiet, peaceful life. Now, to understand who exactly took Pablo's place, let's go back to the 50s. If Medellin is the capital of Colombia's slums, then Cali is the city of sports and football, much like Rostov-on-Don or Voronezh, which are crazy about their local teams. Here the similarity with Voronezh ends. Cali is the only major Colombian city with access to the Pacific coast, and overall, compared to the slum-like Medellin, it looks much neater and more modern. In the early 40s, two brothers, Miguel and Gilberto Rodriguez Orihuela, were born there. There were 6 children in their family. Their mother was a housewife, and their father a not-so-successful artist. The family's income was average, unlike the total poverty of Pablo's family. At 13, Gilberto delivered medicines on a bicycle, then went to study to be a pharmacist, and by the age of 20, he bought the pharmacy where he had worked as a child, all thanks to his charisma and education. Where did he get that kind of money at such a young age, in a country that had not emerged from civil war for decades? The answer is simple: a criminal mindset. He made his biggest money not from honest business, but from the illegal sale of prescription drugs. Despite his young age, he was good at his job and always looked one step ahead. For this, he would get his legendary nickname, El Ajedrecista, the chess player. His brother, Miguel Orihuela, was, one might say, raised by the street, but he was still a very smart guy. Thus, he got the nickname El Señor, the gentleman. Little is known about his childhood. By the age of 20, he had befriended José Londano, who would later become a key factor in the success of the Cali cartel, named after their hometown. By that time, Londano had already put together a whole criminal gang, Los Chimas. They were engaged in kidnapping and occasionally drug trafficking, although by the standards of Colombia at that time, it was just dabbling. Their first big success is interesting. In the late 60s, they kidnapped 2 Swiss citizens, a diplomat and an ordinary student. For the release of the Europeans, they demanded $700,000, $7 million in today's money. The bandits received the ransom and released the Swiss. It is believed that these $700,000 became the starting capital for the Cali cartel. Unlike the Medellin cartel, there is no specific date for the formation of the Cali cartel. Throughout the 70s, they slowly but surely expanded their spheres of influence in the criminal business. At first, like any self-respecting gang, Cali trafficked marijuana, but the market was occupied by larger players, and it was difficult to scale. The quality of marijuana was not as important to the consumer back then, it was about quantity, and they didn't have the resources for that. Fighting with other groups was even more costly. Around the same time, Cali, in parallel with Escobar, decided to switch to cocaine. In the early 70s, they also initially bought the product from neighboring countries but then solved the import substitution issue. But unlike Medellin, they understood that keeping all their eggs in one basket was a very big mistake. At the peak of their fame, they imported not only cocaine into the USA but also heroin, pure opium, and marijuana. Cali had another ace up its sleeve. A separate export item was coca paste, a semi-finished product like frozen fish sticks from our childhood. All that was left was to fry it in the States, and the product was ready. If desired, it could be used to make so-called crack, a cheaper analog of cocaine, especially popular among the poor black population. The members of the Cali cartel were 10 years older than Pablo and watched him grow up before their eyes. With each year, this character became more and more dangerous, he had to be reckoned with. At first, they seemed to ignore each other, but after 77, when it became clear that the market had grown, they had to divide the territory and the money. It must be said that everything went without any particular difficulties, even some tough negotiations were not needed. Cali got New York, their traditional market since the late 60s, managed by Pacho Herrera, a friend of José Londano. He would later play a key role in the history of the Colombian drug business, so we will return to Pacho. Medellín, on the other hand, got all of Florida and the most valuable prize, Miami. That's where the biplanes with cocaine flew. Los Angeles was decided to be a kind of neutral zone, where anyone could trade. The cartels had neither reason nor a particular desire to fight among themselves. Moreover, the Cali leadership was friendly with Jorge Ochoa, one of Pablo's assistants. The structure of the Cali cartel was seriously different from Escobar's group. As a reminder, with the Medellín group, everything resembled a network marketing scheme. At the top of the pyramid stood the one and only Pablo. His subordinates descended from him in a chain, each of whom was in charge of a separate area of business: production, logistics, export, and, of course, distribution. It was destined for few to climb this career ladder. A promotion was only available to the most loyal, maximally devoted employees. In Cali, the structure was more intricate. The cartel consisted of many separate groups. Imagine a honeycomb, only instead of honey, you know what. Because of this structural feature, Cali even had the nickname, the Cartel of 400 Cells. No one knows how many there actually were. Let's look at the Cali structure from the top down. Here are our four bosses. All the money flows to them. The top managers work directly with the bosses, mostly their relatives. Each top manager is responsible for the work of a dozen other employees of a lower level. And these middle managers control the work of those very cells. Now let's look at them. In the center are the rank-and-file managers. They spend all day on the phone and control the entire chain from production to the final sellers. Look, first the farmers grow coca and sell the paste to other people. From there, it goes to laboratories where the paste is turned into cocaine through simple manipulations. The final product goes through a broker to the logisticians. Their task is to transport the cocaine across the border. In the USA, the product falls into the hands of another part of the chain, the distributors. Bought-off financiers are right there to launder the dirty money. At the end of the chain, distributors hand over the goods to wholesalers, who then sell the cocaine to criminal gangs, mostly African American, according to DEA statistics. The final distribution chain of Cali was similar to Medellín's. In truth, it hasn't changed even today. But it was this honeycomb structure that distinguished Cali from the rest, making their system flawless and even invulnerable. Each link was accountable to, and only to, the person with whom it was directly connected. A distributor would never know who exactly supplied him with the product, let alone who produced it. Lower-level managers are protected by intermediaries. In the most critically sensitive places, during the transportation of cargo abroad, brokers act as buffers to make it even harder to get to the organizers. Moreover, all members of the chain were obliged to blend in with the crowd: no luxury cars, branded clothing, or loud parties. No right to make a mistake, no right to an excuse, and no one will give you a second chance. To work with the cartel, one had to fill out a whole form for the local HR. The questions there were appropriate: what kind of house do you have, what kind of car, and where do all your relatives live? If you get caught, the rule is one: keep silent. Even if someone talks, the drug trafficking will not collapse. You have nothing to tell the cops if you know nothing. And in place of one closed cell, two others will grow. To give you an idea, the feds were first able to uncover the criminal scheme only in '79. It took almost 8 years. An important difference: Escobar's people were irreplaceable. If a key person fell out of the Medellín cartel structure, the entire supply chain suffered. But in Cali, people were interchangeable, just like in the corporate world. There are CEOs who have managed to run soda production in their lifetime, and in Cali, there were their own technocrats who could jump from cell to cell if things were not going well in some branch. The methods of drug transportation also differed seriously between the cartels. Escobar's methods were as reckless as he was: private biplanes, speedboats, and islands with mercenaries. Cali was much more conservative and rational. Such tricks couldn't be pulled off in New York. Cocaine was delivered through Panama in containers using cargo ships. Their people in the ports would unload the goods and hand them over to wholesalers. U.S. authorities could physically check only 3% of the total volume of containers. Such small risks were considered operational costs. The cartel had about 800 private cargo ships for transporting legal goods through Mexico, but for every legal good, there was a ton or two of cocaine. Airplanes were loaded in Cali and flew to different cities on the U.S. border, and from there, trucks with the goods spread throughout America. Part of the goods remained in Mexico itself. Modern cartels still use this exact transport route to this day. The most important difference between the Cali cartel and the Medellin group was who led these cartels. Pablo Escobar was always in the public eye. El Patron's charisma, his political ambitions, and ostentatious charity attracted the media and the crowd like a magnet. Even 30 years after his death, Pablo remains among the most famous people in Colombia. And who knew the leaders of the Cali cartel? Only the employees of the Drug Enforcement Administration. It's clear that in their hometown they were important figures, but they were treated as successful businessmen, not as those who wanted to seize power in the country. The chess player, for example, actively invested in his pharmaceutical business. His brother, in hundreds of other diverse companies. These ostentatious businesses were needed for money laundering. The flows of dollars were disguised as fictitious profits of unexpectedly successful companies. But here too, the Cali cartel outdid Escobar. Their personnel were head and shoulders above Pablo's people. They had higher economic education and connections all over the world. The chess player ran banks all over America. Headhunting for the cartel often came precisely from the banking sector. I'll tell you more, even the Medellin cartel came to their colleagues from Cali and asked them to launder their money. Now look at this picture. This is the structure of all the fictitious businesses in Cali many years after the collapse of the cartel. Here is a large block of pharmaceutical companies. Here are the private banks of Panama. These are security organizations in Colombia. Here are real estate agencies in the USA. And here are all sorts of offices in Spain. Hundreds of millions of dollars were laundered through a scheme of buying gold. Money from drugs, which was kept in Italian banks, was used to buy gold bars. Then they were sent to Panama, where they were sold for cash. Or another sophisticated scheme, after the bars got to Panama, they were bought by Colombian gold miners, and it was they who sold it in the USA, passing it off as mined ore. To give you an idea, so much gold was bought that at some point it began to threaten the financial stability of all of Italy. No one dares to visualize all the fictitious businesses of Cali that operated in the 80s. It's easier to make a giant spreadsheet in Excel because there were so many of them. And unlike Escobar, who was not shy about building golden toilets in his personal palace prison, Cali was more secretive. They behaved like ordinary billionaires, hiring private architects, paying fees with Gucci bags stuffed with millions. Well, at least without private zoos with giraffes and pony unicorns, as Pablo had. For almost 20 years, the two Colombian cartels were able to coexist peacefully. From time to time, there were minor hitches in exports. Sometimes Medellin members would kill journalists close to Cali. But these were all just games. Cali always tried to stay away from mass violence. Look, they too could easily kill the entire family of a traitor if he talked to the Colombian feds, but it never came to serious narcoterrorism. In the 80s, Medellin controlled about 80% of the U.S. market. Cali was content with 20 to 30%, but they didn't have a complex about it. It was clear that Escobar's methods would sooner or later destroy his empire. The relationship between the two cartels deteriorated slowly but surely. In 1984, Pablo ordered the assassination of the Minister of Justice. Even then, he believed that it was a member of the Cali cartel who had given away information about his criminal schemes. In the year when Pablo was already actively blowing up Colombian officials, the chess player and Escobar had a conversation. Pablo accused Cali of not fighting the country's authorities as actively as he would like. As punishment, Cali was supposed to hand over one of their bosses, Pacho Herrera, to the Medellin group. The chess player refused. And then Pablo said, "If you're not with me, you're my enemy. And if you are my enemy, I will treat you like an enemy." The last straw was the situation in New York, which divided the history of Colombia into before and after. As often happens in history, it all started with a woman. A close friend of Escobar, nicknamed El Negro, befriended a friend of Pacho Herrera, nicknamed Piña, Pineapple, in prison. Pineapple served his time, while El Negro had another 6 months to serve. But when he got out, he found out that his wife had cheated on him with Pineapple. Without thinking twice, he complained about it to Pablo. According to the Code of Honor, Escobar, in his style, politely but firmly asked the Cali cartel to kill Pineapple. In Cali, as you can guess, they refused. After the refusal, the bloodiest phase of the war between the two cartels began, with downed planes, mass terrorist attacks, and the assassination of politicians. Thousands of Escobar's sicarios methodically carried out terrorist attacks throughout Colombia. Cali responded in kind. The most high-profile case was the bombing of the Monaco building. Cali blew up a car packed with 80 kilograms of TNT under the windows of the hotel where Pablo was staying with his entire family. He was incredibly lucky. No one in the family was killed, although his daughter, as we've mentioned, was left partially deaf forever. As his son Sebastián recalled, only a hand was left of one of the bodyguards. It was found on a tree branch across the street from the explosion site. The death of a talented NBA player from an overdose led to a large-scale war on drugs, which is why Escobar was killed. That was only half the truth. Now you have a great story to tell in some bar on a Friday. The empire of Pablo Escobar was destroyed by a sexual relationship with Pineapple. The war on several fronts weakened Escobar. In 91, he made a deal with the government and was imprisoned in a prison he had built for himself, from which he could still manage his empire. Cali seized the initiative and began to divide the Colombian market. They successfully took advantage of the situation. Their share of the U.S. market began to grow from 20% to 40%. In Colombia itself, Pablo's people were bought out, and the particularly loyal ones were simply killed. While Pablo was fighting with everyone, Cali was building an empire around the world. A few years later, when Escobar went on the run, Cali began to dominate. Escobar's murder put an end to it. The Medellín cartel effectively ceased to exist. A clear monopolist appeared on the world's cocaine market. Unlike the Medellín group, the Cali empire became a truly global player. Cali managed to come to an agreement with the legendary criminal empire, the Yakuza, so that cocaine from Japan would go further to Asian countries and Australia. As for Eastern Europe and Russia, no one knows for sure. There are all sorts of rumors about the Cali cartel's connection with well-known domestic organized crime groups, but I don't believe them, and I advise you not to either. At the peak of its greatness, the Cali cartel occupied an incredible 80% share of the world's cocaine market. To give you an idea of the profitability of this business, in Moscow, a fast food worker earns about $3.50 per hour. In 1995, the heads of the Cali cartel were earning $1.5 million per hour. In Colombia, the new cocaine kings were treated neutrally. On weekends, the whole country cheered for the football team América de Cali, which was owned by the chess player. Tens of thousands of Colombians worked at the cartel's enterprises. Some even managed to compare them to the Kennedy clan, they were so omnipotent. At the peak of their success, Cali also engaged in a peculiar social policy. Escobar is remembered for building neighborhoods for the poor, some of which still stand today. Cali, instead, imagined themselves as sanitizers of the forest. By forest, they meant the social underclass. They killed and threw prostitutes, homeless people, street children, and homosexuals into rivers. They were killed by the hundreds, leaving a note, Cali limpia, Cali linda, clean Cali, beautiful Cali. That is, some completely insane horror. Several poor municipalities in Colombia went bankrupt because they had to constantly spend money on fishing out corpses and performing autopsies. From this newspaper from '92, it is clear that several bodies were found there every day. Cali spent its efforts not only on killing the defenseless but also on demonizing the image of Pablo as the main enemy of Colombia. They acted as if they had nothing to do with it. Such a paradoxical reality. A cartel that killed thousands of people still tried to whitewash itself against the backdrop of Pablo Escobar. And if the authorities did carry out raids on Cali's business structure, tens of thousands of blue-collar workers, not drug dealers, ordinary workers, would go to rallies in defense of their patrons. But this happened infrequently. Almost the entire government of Colombia, including the local minister of defense, was bought by the Cali cartel by the mid-90s. The incorruptible were not killed, as Escobar did, but were severely intimidated. But mostly, leading politicians agreed to work with Cali. They were the main sponsors of their election campaigns, including President Ernesto Samper. The cartel spent $10 million on his election. Unlike Pablo, who financed young and promising politicos, Cali tried to work with already experienced representatives of the authorities. Cali had two lists of politicians. In one were their friends and everyone who had passed the test over the years of working together. And in the second, they put undesirable individuals whom they considered unreliable but necessary. As the chess player said, politicians are just like gangsters, but you have to be friends with them or you're in deep shit. When you look at the history of Cali, it's hard to believe that such a large empire could collapse. This impression is deceptive. By the mid-90s, Cali began to have problems. Here's the thing, American drug control had spent huge budgets on the humiliation of Pablo Escobar. Thousands of operatives had studied the ins and outs of the Colombian drug business for years. And although they cooperated with Cali, everyone understood perfectly well that they couldn't just stop at the elimination of Escobar. When the repressive machine has already started working, it's hard to stop. Other security forces also need promotions, they also need medals. Adding fuel to the fire was the recently elected American president, Bill Clinton, who needed to explain to the voters why money was spent. Escobar was killed, but the amount of cocaine in the country was not decreasing. Moreover, the story with the presidential elections paid for by the Cali cartel was also eventually revealed. The president of Colombia had to make shameful excuses for how $10 million could have accidentally ended up at the disposal of his headquarters. The American government quickly took a dislike to such international allies. Escobar's sicarios suddenly began to kill Cali's people, and honest policemen who had not yet been bribed began to carry out raids on the cartel's cells. Against the backdrop of this whole situation, the godfathers of the cocaine mafia began to slowly go crazy. They were already in their 50s, had earned their billions, and could have retired. But in the end, they found themselves in the same trap where Pablo Escobar had recently been. Such a cruel irony. And you know what's even more ironic? Just like in Brigada, the Cali drug empire was destroyed by a bodyguard, a traitor. In the 90s, Jorge Salcedo was responsible for the security of the four godfathers of the cartel. He was an engineer by education and did not start working for the cartel of his own free will. Salcedo was good at one thing, he could very quickly and clearly set up a security system in very specific conditions. In the 80s, he fought against radicals on the side of the government. The chess player noticed him, invited him to a meeting, and suggested he use his skills against Pablo Escobar. Salcedo had no choice. But at the same time, as he later said, he did not consider himself a criminal. Destroying Escobar was more important. In the service of the Cali cartel, Salcedo risked his life many times. After Escobar's murder, he was not much needed by them. He was still kept on staff. Salcedo was engaged in the private security of the relatives and close associates of the drug lords. As one of the inner circle, Salcedo was forced to participate in the murders of the cartel's subordinates. But he didn't like it at all. He tried several times to persuade the bosses to retire in peace, but they wouldn't let him go. Salcedo understood that he had two options: try to escape and be killed, or betray the cartel and hope for a miracle. The bodyguard made his choice. He contacted the CIA and began to leak information about the movements of the kings throughout Colombia. At some point, he caught the perfect moment to turn in El Señor. He turned to the Americans and local security forces, and they raided the drug lord's estate. But he wasn't there. The bought-off Colombian police arrived on the scene and drove the Americans away. Salcedo was not found, but the stakes rose sharply. He was about to escape, but he needed time to get his whole family out of Colombia. For several more months, Salcedo lived with El Señor, leaking information to the DEA and preparing his departure. On August 6, 1995, the National Police of Colombia caught El Señor. Salcedo had taken the day off. He and his family were already in the USA under state protection. After the capture of El Señor, the Cali cartel began to crumble like a house of cards. Thousands of documents were found in the drug lord's house, which led the authorities to the remaining members of the cartel. 3 immediately surrendered to the authorities. The chess player was arrested during a police raid in Cali. José Londano was caught in a restaurant. Pacho Herrera was captured by Colombian radicals. At first, the arrested drug lords did not lose heart. To the surprise of the USA, all the criminals ended up in prisons in their native Colombia and calmly settled in there. The country's president forbade their extradition due to demonstrably ridiculous loopholes in the law. Whether he did this out of fear for his life or because he was paid bribes, no one knows. Cali's business in the USA was systematically leveled to the ground. The European market still remained with them. The chess player and El Señor tried to manage the legacy of their empire from prison, but it became extremely difficult to do so with each passing day. A year later, José Londano escaped from prison and tried to recreate the cartel from the remnants of the Medellín group and particularly loyal thugs. 2 months later, he was shot by Colombian feds. Pacho Herrera was killed by his longtime enemies while he was playing football in prison, which raises questions about the level of containment of the drug lords. They were eventually extradited from Colombia to the USA in the 2000s. The chess player was charged with, don't laugh, the illegal import of 150 kilos of cocaine. El Señor was charged with a modest money laundering offense. Given the aggravating circumstances, in 2006 they were sentenced to 30 years in prison. As a bonus, they were forced to give up their assets worth $2 billion. In exchange, their relatives were guaranteed freedom in Colombia. In May of this year, the chess player died. His brother Miguel is now 78 years old. He is not yet complaining about his health. From time to time, he gives interviews that destroy the reputations of Colombian politicians. He has nothing to lose, so he openly says who the Cali cartel bought, when, and for how much. The one who turned them in, Salcedo, received his prize, $2 million, and he lives peacefully in the USA under the Witness Protection Program. After the destruction of the Cali cartel, a vacuum finally formed in the Colombian drug business. Just a couple of years before, the country's crime was divided into 2 clear camps, and now there was no one to fight for. Smaller players, at the level of middle managers, tried to seize the initiative. For example, a former partner of Cali, the Norte del Valle cartel, was briefly able to restore trade through Mexico. In the 2000s, the Envigado cartel became active. All these heirs were not as ambitious as their predecessors, so sooner or later they were caught by the DEA and the Colombian police. Researchers of this topic are in solidarity. There will be no more cartel that can compare in scale to the Medellín or Cali groups. Since the 2000s, criminal groups have become increasingly independent and decentralized. Laboratories are less and less frequently found in the jungles of Colombia. Cocaine is now literally made in apartment kitchens. Cryptocurrencies and modern technology simplify the lives of criminals, but they are still very far from the level of Pablo and Cali. From time to time, journalists find out that almost the entire top brass of Colombia is tainted. 65 members of the local Duma in 2008. A third of the parliament was tainted. In recent years, the most brutal attempts to consolidate power were made by Los Urabinos, the Gulf Clan cartel, but last year its leader was extradited to the USA. The entire previous history of his colleagues tells us that the clan does not have long to live. The cocaine traffic has also changed. In the era of mobile phones and GPS, no one flies biplanes anymore. Supplies by sea and air are also not needed. Now Mexico has seized the initiative. Coca paste is transported from Ecuador and Peru, and cocaine is produced right on the border. It turned out funny, Colombia, once the homeland of cocaine, is simply no longer needed by modern drug lords. In fact, the story with Mexico is much more complicated than it seems. The local narcos built an empire that, believe it or not, was even more inventive than in Colombia. New kings appeared. The most famous, El Chapo, made a name for himself. A new type of drug, methamphetamine, became famous. And what's most terrible is that right now, in 2022, the same thing is happening in Mexico as was in Colombian Medellín in the early 90s. In short, there is a lot of interesting stuff.